So there's this hope we have, and I think it probably just comes from stories in terms of fictional media that someone who's a genuinely good person, but they a single lie they believe, and then that causes them to go down the path that they feel is righteous, but they're in the wrong side of things, and then eventually they find out that they've been lied to or whatever, and then they flip sides, and the whole thing crumbles like it's a big tower of lies. I mean, yeah, that does happen sometimes, and it works okay in a narrative for a story, just because things that's a lot less complicated than real life, so it's a lot easier to follow. But I found it's definitely not the case. Sometimes that does occur, but it's more like a castle than a tower. You can try to knock down the wall of the castle. You can break off part of the or the rook or whatever. You can do whatever, but it doesn't. It's usually not okay. Well, I've shown you this one thing, and now you should question the whole thing. People generally do not do that, and it's really tough. And what you end up with is basically what you're seeing now with Black Lives Matter activists acting like religious fundamentalists. Walking into restaurants and demanding, first they demanded you take the knee, now they demand you raise your fist in solidarity with them. And if you don't, they freak out. They scream in your face. They threaten you with violence. No one would normally think that that's something that was okay, acceptable behavior. You have to be pretty well radicalized to do that. And effectively, they're religious fundamentalists. It's just that their religion is essentially the cult of BLM and all the lies that's built on. And a lot of people get bullied into it, and they say, "Yeah, raise your fist because I think Black Lives Matter, right?" And then there's a whole there's other people who are just naturally defiant to that. I fall into that category where somebody tells me what to do in that kind of situation, I don't take it lightly, let's just say. And then there's other people who are on the other, and I guess actually more I'm in this camp, where it's not a matter of just them telling me pisses me off. It's that I believe the fundamental opposite, and the reasons they think that I'm not raising my fist are just completely wrong, because they just say you're racist. Well, that's why you're not raising your fist. You're a racist, and they truly believe that, like religious fundamentalists. It's like when ISIS rolled into a town, they say, "Oh, everybody who's Islamic, you got to come out and pray 5 times a day, and if you don't, bow and give the tithes and show your support directly for the Islamic State, well, you must hate God and hate Islam and hate everybody," and they would use that to enact violence against you, or at the very least, they usually use that to enact social pressure against you. And that's how you get Islamic fundamentalist states like the takeover in Iran in the 70s. So like Iran right now, the Taliban, the way they operated. It's not always super violent, but they do use pressure, and they use social pressure, and they think they're righteous because they usually believe a bunch of lies. Sometimes it's religious. In this case, it's political, but it's really not all that different than a religious cult or basically a bunch of religious fundamentalists. Well, they're not simply recruiting people to their beliefs. They're demanding people become in their beliefs, because to not be in line with their beliefs means something that says something about you. That's fundamentally very un-Christian. Not that hasn't occurred in Christian societies. It absolutely has occurred. It's not a good thing. It's human nature to go down these routes. It's just that I think when it's religion, people pay more attention to it. When it's something political, I don't think they look at it the same way. And really, there's not much difference in terms of the belief system of BLM as there is with a religious belief system. It is stacked on a book of things they find truthful, and but then they spin that even more, where it's, if you reject this, then that means XYZ about you. Christianity isn't supposed to do that, not that people haven't done that, but Islam does tend to do this, which is why you see basically fundamentalist Islamic countries and that have a Christian population or a Jewish population of 10, 15, 25%, and then they're just slowly weeded out, and they either flee the country or they're just simply they're simply destroyed. And that's kind of what the BLM stuff is. That's the stage they've reached, because they're going into restaurants and they're demanding solidarity. You should see what happens when somebody doesn't release we saw this on Twitter when certain companies didn't release any statements about the George Floyd thing, because it's none of their business and they don't know. And it was like, well, you mean you don't support Black Lives Matter? You won't post a black square? You won't hashtag? You won't do this? Well, that means you support X. That's religious fundamentalism. That's what that is. It's the same thing, and we've seen it to varying degrees, and it's only gotten worse over time. And it's particularly on the left. You do sometimes see it on the right. There are some, wacky Christian people, and there's wacky, ultranationalists and whatnot, but not nearly to the degree that you're seeing this, at least in terms of the mainstream, the way it works with BLM. You can't just disagree with somebody. You must be secretly a racist or unbelievably ignorant to believe something. So what leads people to this? Well, this is what I'm calling the castle of lies. It's really rare that a single lie is holding someone onto a narrative. But all it takes is a single lie to move somebody down the path of a specific narrative. The media knows this. Hence why they don't usually go back and correct things they've gotten wrong. Because all you need to do is you need to put a lie out there, and just the right amount of people need to bite on it, and now they're already on the path. They're now conditioned to believe whatever other things, more outrageous things you're going to put forward. And then what happens is it becomes very, very difficult to debate or talk with or have any kind of honest conversation with somebody who's now in that camp, because they're working from a completely different set of information than you are. It makes it impossible for one side to talk to the other, like a cult, basically, where now if you talk to somebody and suppose you go to a moderator, somebody who just doesn't know what's going on, that person is now saying the complete opposite of what you're saying, which might be the truth. Or yours might be more nuanced, or you might be wrong too. But now all they see is these two sides saying opposing viewpoints that cannot coexist. And they just see and they say, okay, well, somebody's lying. And the goal is that you get people to believe the lie, that, in the media's case, the lie they want to believe. So basically, and then the more abhorrent the lies are, the harder it becomes to actually have a conversation with somebody and de-radicalize them. Because if they believe something that your side did or whatever about somebody that is utterly abhorrent, and now you're the one defending it, they just look at it as you defending something abhorrent or being in total denial of it. And they could be completely wrong, but it doesn't matter, because now you're starting from a very, very hot position, and it becomes difficult. So you got to convince them you're not a monster, and convince them to believe the opposite of what they've been conditioned to believe. That's not easy. That rarely occurs. It's kind of like you're watching Tim Pool, and he just really was like slowly red-pilled over time. He basically he figured out some lies firsthand, and then that set him down the path of basically reversing where he was, and now he's in line with your average conservative. Like, they say a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. He kind of was mugged, but he had a very slow process to undo the castle of BS that basically he had been fed for his entire life. And people on the right have the same problem too. But this is particularly because of what the media is in charge. It's making it very, very difficult. Now, here's some examples. Something tough to talk to somebody about, right? The idea that the president, in his initial speech announcing that when he was running, he called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He did not call Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said they're not sending their best. Some, he's sure, are good people, but they're sending rapists, murderers, and so on. He was talking about basically the border wall. That's objectively true, essentially, that, Mexico isn't sending, missionaries and people who want to, live a better life. That was attracting coyotes, murderers, gang members, all kinds of, again, some of the people were good, but it wasn't a knock against all Mexicans. It just was a knock about the fact that the border was wide open, and that was an opportunity to some of the worst people out there. Now, was Donald Trump super articulate on that? No, not really. It's a tough, mixed kind of, he wasn't, and I've heard arguments where say, well, the way he stated it meant that he implied it. Well, he hasn't said anything after the fact to imply that, and he did clarify after the fact, so I let him walk on that. That doesn't, I'm more concerned about the border being wide open than I am concerned about, how he, may have offended some Mexicans. But to each his own. But suppose you believe that. Suppose you believe the headline, you get the little tiny clip, and you don't get the whole context of what he's talking about. Now you believe that. Then someone says, "Hey, he mocked a disabled reporter," and they freeze frame him like this, right, when he was shaking his hands. That's completely not. I should say, the idea that he mocked this guy for his disability is completely not true. But the idea that he mocked a reporter who was disabled, that is true. He was mocking the guy for basically lying, and he was doing this hand gesture thing that he has done multiple times before. He did it when he was talking about Ted Cruz. He did it when he was talking about some general. And it just was, it was a Trumpism. He just, that was his like, oh, I'm confused. It was silly. It might have been distasteful. I wasn't a big fan of that. And this is one of those moments when I saw that and I was like, oh God. And then someone showed me the full context. Like, I ended up going out of my way to look for the video, and I was like, I don't know about that. And then I saw that, okay, well, that wasn't so bad. And then I saw that he had done it before multiple times to mock completely different people. And I was like, okay, well, that definitely means it has nothing to do with the disability. And then I was seeing all the screenshots where they froze with the wrist bent. That was a setup. The media lied about this. Now, if you don't know that, and you actually believe he mocked a disabled reporter, maybe you've got somebody who's disabled in your family, right? That's going to hit home. You have prejudged that person. And now anything bad that comes out about that person, you're going to be predispositioned to believe it. And that's what the media wants. That's what they want. That's how they have the control. So the key that they go for is they start with something vague. Did he call Mexicans rapists and murderers? Well, he called Mexican rapists and murderers. But did he call all Mexicans rapists and murderers? No. Was it distasteful the way did he articulate that particularly well? Not really. It was not particularly great way of him articulating it, but it's vague enough where, oh, now it's an argument. And then, the next lie and the next lie. And you keep making shit up and you never look back and correct it. And it builds to the point where you get conspiracy theories about Russian agents and COVID and just stuff that just blatantly ignores very simple factual information. And people buy into it. There are still people who think Trump is a Russian asset. That's been debunked by every possible source, including the Mueller report, which just concluded no Americans worked with the Russians, period. And then they still claim, the Russians tried to influence the election. Well, that's sort of technically true. They bought some Facebook's ads, but that was it, and not nearly as much as what we were seeing. I mean, the fact that they were using foreign made-up intelligence to get FISA warrants to investigate the president of the United States, or really was it the campaign, a political rival, like, that's a very complicated situation that does not at all make the Obama administration look squeaky clean. But the media won't talk about that because it's complicated. What's easy is to say Russia helped Trump win. That's a very easy thing to say. It's not true. Now, that frustrates people who are paying attention. But if you're not paying attention and that's all you hear, and then before, you maybe believe that he mocked a disabled reporter. You believe that he locked up kids in cages. That wasn't true. That ended up, the photos from that ended up being from the Obama administration. But that's not what people said originally. And so now you're predisposed to believe something that's total bullshit. And what do you do about it? Well, if you're in that bubble, I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be in that, because I've never been. I'm always looking for things to correct what what I think about stuff. I try to look at contradictory information because I want to be right. But if you're just kind of like your average Joe and you're hearing something, or you really do believe, like if somebody told me like, Hitler tortured rats in his basement, and like something that like came out and said that, like you would say, yeah, I heard that. Would you believe it? Probably, right? Seems like the kind of guy who would do it. But it might factually be incorrect. If you paint, the president as the evil orange Hitler, suddenly the more and more crap that you pile onto him just becomes more and more acceptable and easily accepted by basically a group of people who've already preconditioned to believe a certain type of things. You see this on Twitter. A news company or even a senator or something will tweet something that is completely fabricated, completely wrong, or completely out of context. It'll get 100,000 retweets, and people will comment on it. Celebrities will say how horrible it is, and they'll pearl clutch, and then they'll issue a correction. Sometimes they'll issue a correction within hours. and the correction gets, a tenth of the coverage and the retweets that the initial accusation made. The damage is done. The damage is done because now the people who are already predisposed to believe that have seen that and they believe that. Or they believe, well, someone said that, it might have happened. It's like he was accused of this. And if you're already further down that, if that castle of the lies that you've collected has already been built up, just because there's been a hole punched in one of them, doesn't mean the whole thing collapses. And then you do that enough, and it pretty much justifies violent action or election tampering. That is kind of the end goal. Would you cheat in an election to stop Hitler? There's always the question, would you go back in time and shoot Hitler? Would you go back in time and shoot baby Hitler, right? Well, it's the same thing. This is the same philosophical extrapolation, except that they've convinced you that Hitler or equivalent is alive now, and you have to beat him. You have to stop him from getting power, right? Because they're gonna wipe out the minorities, or they're gonna do this, or they're gonna do that. And none of it's based in reality, but you've now been, you've had this castle of lies build up. So this seems perfectly rational to you. So now it's okay. Well, what would I do to stop Hitler? Would I cheat in an election? Maybe would I fudge the numbers a little bit? Would I send in a few extra mail-in ballots that might not exactly be valid, but they count? Suddenly, that person, an otherwise moral person, now is facing essentially an ethical question, and they're being told that if you don't basically lie, cheat, and steal to get to achieve this political aim, then you're essentially complicit with it because you're just going to let this happen. It's silly, but that's really what the end goal is. And I'm seeing it be extremely effective. This is why we're as divided as we are. This civil conflict that's brewing, it's going to be up to the moderates. It's going to be up to the moderates. You guys have to make your voices loud and clear on what side the truth's on. Because if you do not, and you go with what the left is pushing, it's going to lead to civil conflict, period. Because they've got their people worked up, and they're already out there rioting, burning, destroying, stealing. They're justifying it. They're saying, well, at least they're not killing anybody, but they're killing people still, and it's not ignored. Well, look at this case with this Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Everybody knows this kid's story, but did they talk about David Dorn when he was killed? Like, did the media talk about that at all? And that wasn't a self-defense shooting. That was somebody just murdered him for television, who was basically a BLM person rioting. The other people, the cop that they tried to kill yesterday, who they bricked. Do we know that cop's name? Or is there demands to find the person who threw the brick at the police officer? No, there's not. There's only this poor kid who defended himself and surrendered to the police. And it's also the narrative of Jacob Blake. He was not unarmed. He was wanted on a felony. They were responding to a 911 call. I mean, I saw people saying, he was just trying to break up a fight. Like, that's a complete fabrication. Where the hell did that come from? But people say that, and since they're predisposed now to think that, the police are just out there murdering people, murdering black people because they're black, because they saw the headline that said, a black person was shot in the back by a police officer in front of their children with no other context and no other explanation, and they didn't go out of their way to watch the full videos, they're predisposed to now believe that. So now when you add another lie on top of it, they share it. They instinctively share it. They feel more righteous. They feel that this is even more outrageous. And the people they're fighting against are even worse than what they, or as bad as they've been told that they are. It's predisposition. It's the castle of lies. And they're never going to listen to people on the right. They're like the left people who are radicalized. They are never going to listen to them because they've been told that we're Nazis and we're all these other things. The moderates, they might actually listen to. So my plea is that if you got a friend who's heading down that radicalized path, step up and do something about it. You have to at least speak up and let them know, like, hey, this is completely wrong. And it might cost you a friendship, but you have to do something because it's getting to the point where they are going to feel they are morally justified to take violent action, or I should say further violent action than what's already occurring. And it's not good for anybody. It's not good for the people they're attacking, and it's particularly not good for them because, you know, if they are righteous anger and they show up to burn down somebody's house and that person shoots them for trying to do that, it doesn't matter whether they thought they were in the right or not. They're still dead. And that could have been avoided had they, you know, not been building this castle of lies. It's largely the media that has done this. Some people do it to themselves. Basically, people who are like predisposed to like conspiracy theories and whatnot, in terms of like just believing weird shit. But it's a lot like religious fundamentalism. Basically, they keep stacking all this nonsense one after another, and now just because somebody punched a hole in one of the things doesn't mean that the whole thing's going to collapse, because they still have all this other basis to back it up on. You know, just imagine trying to talk about, you know, defending Donald Trump on anything, something that might be complete total BS, and you're just like, nah, that's not what I believe about that, or that's not what he said. Then it becomes, even if you get that right, it's then, well, you came out of the woodwork to defend the guy who mocked somebody who was disabled, and I'm personally offended by that. And then what are you going to say? Well, that's also incorrect. You can't. They're always going to have something. And then eventually I found that they usually then say something that is completely out of left field, that you've never heard before, that's completely based on nothing, and you don't have a response to it because there's no evidence either way of it, because it's not something that even remotely occurred. The Russia stuff was a good example. There was a lot of just like people saying things about that, and you're like, well, I can't disprove this because I can't find where this even exists, because so many other things lies would have to be true in order for that to even be possible. And now I don't even know where you're coming from. And that's the point we're at. You know, I don't want people getting hurt, but there's going to be a lot of people who get hurt if they continue down this path. If their anger is so self-righteous and they really think they're fighting evil orange Hitler, so one side's getting hurt, and either one side's getting wiped out by the far left because that's what they want, or the far left is going to end up, you know, going home in body bags because people defend themselves. The only thing that prevents that, essentially, is the moderates standing up and let the far left know that, no, you guys are wrong, you're living in la-la land, come back into the family, because if you don't, we're going to be here to back up everybody else who doesn't want to fight. You guys are out there looting, destroying, burning. Can't have that. Can't have that. I don't care what the justification is. It doesn't matter. There could be police randomly murdering people. It doesn't justify this. It does not. So, whatever. That's my thoughts on that. It's a scary thing to watch, and people I've known for years, they get buried in that castle of lies. You can't contradict anything they're saying. Even if they fundamentally believe different set of beliefs, like, you know, they're communists or something, they still usually believe a whole set of things that justify the insanity that they are now pushing. And then they have no idea where you're coming from when you're like, yeah, they try to burn down my house, I'm going to shoot them. And then all of a sudden it's like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense to them. Because there's the righteous anger of the people who are trying to now burn your property is justified, so therefore they're innocent, so you can't defend yourself. Because what they're fighting against is so much more morally repugnant that your house couldn't possibly be worth it, right? That's how shit escalates. And I don't want to keep heading down this path. We see what's going on, and we see what the media is trying to do to this kid who defended himself. And this is exactly why I had said the other day, like, don't show up. Don't show up. They're looking to make martyrs, and they're looking to make an example out of somebody. And this kid, I think in the moment, totally justified what happened. But in terms of the overall strategy, it's, you know, I don't know how we got separated, but he definitely shouldn't have been put in that position. So, you know, shame on the adults who were with him. They should have known better. But at the same time, he really didn't do anything wrong. So, you know, what do we do? I don't know. But that's my analysis of the Castle of Lies. So, whatever. I'd like to know what other people's thoughts are on this. Have they run into the same issues that I'm running into, or I should say that I see on a daily basis that make me like actually really worried? I'd love to know. So, comment below.